The great hall of the Draconian Palace had never been so quiet. High Matriarch Viscara stood at the center of the room, her massive body still as stone. Her scales, normally a proud shade of deep crimson, had turned dull with worry. Around her, the leaders of the 12 noble houses waited in terrible silence. The incubation chamber was empty. Viscara had checked it herself 3 times. She had walked through the sacred room where the eggs had rested for 200 years. She had touched the heated stones where the shells had cracked open just 3 weeks ago. She had searched every corner, every shadow, every hidden space. The hatchlings were gone. How is this possible? Lord Carvax demanded. His voice echoed off the ancient walls. The chamber has guards at every entrance. The doors require 3 different keys to open. No one enters without permission from the council itself. And yet, Viscara said slowly, 12 hatchlings have vanished like smoke in the wind. She turned to face the assembled nobles. Each one represented a bloodline that stretched back thousands of years. Each one had waited decades for this clutch to hatch. Dragon eggs were rare. Dragon births were rarer still. The last successful hatching had been 40 years ago, and those dragons were now fully grown warriors and scholars. These 12 hatchlings were supposed to be the future. They were supposed to carry the noble bloodlines forward for another generation. They were supposed to bring hope to an empire that had begun to whisper about extinction. Now they were gone. General Thornax stepped forward. He was the largest dragon in the room, his scales a deep green that had earned him the nickname the Forest Shadow during the Border Wars. His wings, folded tight against his back, still bore the scars of 100 battles. "My soldiers have searched the entire palace," he reported. "We have examined every room, every passage, every secret tunnel from the old wars. The hatchlings are not here." "Then search the city," Viscara commanded. "We have. They are not in the city either." Lady Sereth, the oldest of the noble leaders, made a sound of distress. Her scales had long ago faded to a pale silver, and her eyes were clouded with age. But her mind was still sharp, and her voice still carried weight. "Hatchlings do not simply disappear," she said. "They are barely able to walk. They cannot fly. They require warmth and food and constant care. Someone must have taken them. But who?" Lord Carvax demanded. "Who would dare? Who would even be able to? Our security is perfect. Our guards are loyal. No enemy has set foot on Dracaros in 300 years." Viscara closed her eyes. She thought about the hatchlings she had seen just days ago. 12 tiny creatures, their scales still soft and new. They had chirped and tumbled over each other, learning to use their legs, snapping at floating dust particles with their small teeth. She had watched them sleep in a warm pile, their little hearts beating fast against each other. Where were they now? Were they cold? Were they hungry? Were they frightened? The thought made her want to tear the palace apart stone by stone. "Expand the search," she ordered. "Every ship that has left this planet in the past 3 weeks must be tracked. Every cargo container must be examined. Every passenger must be questioned. That will take months," General Thornax said carefully. "Then it will take months. I do not care if it takes years. I do not care if we must search every rock in every system. Those hatchlings will be found." What Viscara did not know, what no one in that great hall could have guessed, was that the hatchlings had not been taken at all. They had left on their own dot. It had started with the smallest one. Her scales were more blue than purple, and she was always the most curious of the clutch. While her siblings slept, she had explored the edges of the incubation chamber. She had found a small gap in the wall where a heating pipe passed through. The gap was barely large enough for a hatchling to squeeze through, but she had squeezed through. And her siblings, waking to find her gone, had followed. They had moved through the palace like tiny ghosts. They were small enough to hide in shadows, quiet enough to pass unnoticed. Some ancient instinct guided them, something written deep in their blood. They needed to find something, though none of them understood what. They found a cargo container being loaded for transport to a neutral trading station. The container was full of cloth and preserved food, and it was warm from sitting in the sun. The hatchlings crawled inside and burrowed into the soft fabric. 3 days later, they arrived at a busy trading post filled with ships from a dozen different species. The hatchlings stayed hidden, watching and waiting. Ships came and went. Crews loaded and unloaded cargo. Voices in strange languages filled the air. Then a new ship arrived. It was old and battered, with rust spots on its hull and an engine that coughed black smoke. The name painted on the side was faded, but still readable. The Rusty Bucket. The ship's captain was a human woman named Carol, and she was in a hurry. She had a delivery to make and no time for proper inspections. Her crew loaded cargo quickly, carelessly, not bothering to check what was inside each container. The hatchlings felt something when the human ship arrived. A pull, a warmth. Something that called to them from across the loading bay. They climbed out of their container and scurried across the floor, hiding behind crates and under vehicles. No one noticed 12 small shapes moving in the shadows. No one saw them slip through a gap in the Rusty Bucket's cargo hold door. The ship took off an hour later, bound for a small human colony called New Montana. In the cargo hold, surrounded by machine parts and food supplies, 12 dragon hatchlings curled together and slept. They did not know where they were going. They did not understand why they had left their home. They only knew that something important was waiting for them. Something warm, something safe, something that felt like belonging. Back on Dracaris, the search continued. Ships were stopped and searched. Planets were scanned. Rewards were offered. Threats were made. The great Draconian Empire turned its full attention to finding the missing heirs, but they were looking in the wrong places. They were searching military outposts and rival territories. They were investigating enemies and traitors. They never thought to check a broken-down human freighter heading for a colony that most star maps did not even bother to name. The hatchlings traveled through space, dreaming of warmth, while an empire fell into chaos behind them. Danny Kowalski wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the broken engine in front of him. The thing was a mess. Whoever had owned this ship before had clearly never heard of regular maintenance. Oil leaked from 3 different places. 2 of the fuel lines were cracked, and something had built a nest inside the air filter. People treat their machines like garbage, Danny muttered to himself. And then they wonder why nothing works. He picked up his wrench and got back to work. Danny's repair shop sat at the edge of the New Montana colony's only spaceport. It was not a fancy place. The walls were made of corrugated metal. The floor was stained with years of oil and coolant. Shelves lined with spare parts covered every available surface, and half-finished projects cluttered the corners. But Danny loved it. This shop was his. He had built it with his own hands 10 years ago, when he first arrived on this dusty little colony world. Back then, New Montana had been nothing but a few dozen settlers trying to make a life on a planet that did not seem to want them. Now it was home to almost 2,000 people, with farms and schools and shops and everything a small town needed, and they all needed someone to fix their machines. That was where Danny came in. He was good at his job. Everyone said so. Farmers brought him broken harvesters. Miners brought him damaged drilling equipment. Pilots brought him ships that should have been scrapped years ago. Danny fixed them all. He had a gift for understanding how things worked, for seeing the problem and finding the solution. His ex-wife Linda used to say he was better at talking to machines than to people. She had meant it as a joke at first. Then she had meant it as a complaint. Then she had left. That was 5 years ago. Danny did not think about her much anymore. He finished replacing the fuel lines and moved on to the air filter. The nest inside turned out to belong to some kind of small rodent that had died months ago. Danny cleaned it out, trying not to breathe through his nose. "Disgusting," he said to no one. "Absolutely disgusting." It was almost midnight when he finally finished. The ship's owner, a trader named Pete, who passed through the colony twice a year, would be happy. Danny wiped his hands on a rag and looked around his shop. He should go home. He had a small house about a 10-minute walk from the spaceport. It had a bed, a kitchen, and not much else. Danny spent most of his time at the shop anyway, but tonight, something made him pause. A sound, very faint, almost like a bird chirping. Danny frowned. There were no birds on New Montana. The planet had insects and some small lizard-like creatures, but nothing that made a sound like that. He heard it again. A soft, high-pitched noise coming from the back of the shop. "Hello?" Danny grabbed a flashlight from his workbench. "Is someone there?" Silence. He walked slowly toward the back, where he kept stacks of salvaged hull plating and old engine cores. The light from the main shop did not reach this corner. Shadows gathered thick and dark. The chirping started again, louder this time. It was coming from behind a pile of metal sheets leaning against the wall. Danny raised his flashlight. "If you're some kind of space rat, I'm warning you. I've got a really big wrench, and I know how to use it." He pushed aside one of the metal sheets. 12 pairs of eyes stared back at him. Glowing in the flashlight beam. Danny dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the floor and rolled away, the light spinning crazily across the walls. In that flickering light, he saw them clearly. They were small, about the size of house cats. They had scales that shimmered between purple and green, changing color as they moved. They had wings, though the wings looked too small to actually fly with. They had long tails that curled and twitched. And they had faces that looked up at him with an expression that seemed almost curious. "What the hell?" Danny whispered. One of the creatures, smaller than the others with scales that were more blue, made a trilling sound. It took a step toward him. "No," Danny said, backing away. No. Stay right there. I don't know what you are, but I'm not qualified for this. I fix engines. I don't deal with whatever this is." The blue one ignored him. It waddled forward on unsteady legs, chirping softly. Before Danny could move, it had reached his foot. It looked up at him, made a sound that was almost like a question, and then started climbing. Danny stood frozen as the creature scaled his pant leg. Its tiny claws pricked through the fabric but did not hurt. It climbed higher, past his knee, past his belt, up his shirt. Then it reached his chest and stopped. The little creature turned around 3 times, like a dog settling into its bed. Then it curled into a ball right over Danny's heart, tucked its tail around its body, and closed its eyes. A deep, rumbling sound came from its chest. It was purring. "Oh no," Danny said. "Oh no, this is bad. This is really, really bad." The other 11 creatures were watching him now. They had crept out from behind the metal sheets and formed a half circle around his feet. They did not look threatening. They looked hopeful. They looked hungry. Danny's eyes went wide. "When was the last time you ate? Do you even eat? What do you eat?" The blue one on his chest purred louder. "I don't have any food here," Danny said desperately. "I mean, I have some protein bars, but I don't think those are good for whatever you are. Are you lizards, dragons? Some kind of alien species I've never heard of?" No answer, of course. Just 11 pairs of eyes watching him and one small creature sleeping on his chest, like it had always belonged there. Danny stood in his shop for a long time, trying to figure out what to do. He should call someone. The Colonial Authority, maybe. Or the spaceport security. Or at least his neighbor Maggie. who was a retired pilot and had seen more of the galaxy than anyone else in the colony. But something stopped him. The creature on his chest was so warm against him. Its purring was so steady and peaceful. And the others looked so small and vulnerable, huddled together on his shop floor. "Okay," Danny said finally. "Okay, one night. I'll let you stay one night, and then I'll figure out what to do with you." He carefully bent down and picked up his flashlight. The creatures scattered slightly, then regrouped around his feet. "Come on," he said, walking toward the small room at the back of the shop, where he sometimes napped during long repair jobs. "There's a couch back here. It's not much, but it's warm." The creatures followed him like a parade of tiny ghosts. Danny lay down on the couch, the blue one still attached to his chest. The others climbed up and arranged themselves around him, on his legs, against his sides. One on each shoulder. He was completely surrounded by warm, purring creatures. "This is crazy," Danny said to the ceiling. "This is absolutely crazy." But despite everything, despite the confusion and the worry and the certainty that he was making a terrible mistake, Danny smiled. Then he closed his eyes and slept better than he had in years. 3 weeks passed, and Danny did not call anyone. Every morning he woke up and told himself that today was the day. Today he would contact the authorities. Today he would report the strange creatures living in his shop. Today he would find out where they came from and send them back. And every morning he looked at 12 small faces watching him with complete trust. And he could not do it. The creatures had settled into his life like they had always been there. They had their own personalities, their own habits, their own ways of demanding attention. Danny had started giving them names, even though he knew he should not get attached. The blue one was Pip. She was the smallest and the bravest. She refused to sleep anywhere except on Danny's chest, tucked under his chin where she could feel his heartbeat. When he worked, she perched on his shoulder and watched everything he did with intense concentration. The largest one was Max. His scales were more green than purple, and he had a habit of knocking things off shelves just to watch them fall. Danny had already lost 2 coffee cups and a jar of bolts to Max's curiosity. Then there was Sunny, whose scales turned almost golden in direct light, and Rocky, who liked to sleep inside Danny's toolbox, and Pepper, who sneezed every time she got near engine oil, and 7 others, each one unique, each one finding their own place in Danny's chaotic little world. He had converted the back room of his shop into a nesting area. He lined it with old blankets and installed extra heating panels. He bought protein packs from the market and discovered, through trial and error, that the creatures preferred cooked meat to raw and would not touch vegetables no matter how he prepared them. They ate a lot. His food budget had tripled. Maggie, his neighbor, noticed something was different. She stopped by the shop one afternoon, her sharp eyes scanning the cluttered space. "You look tired," she said, "and happy. That's a strange combination for you." Danny shrugged, trying to look casual. "Just busy. Lots of repairs this month." Maggie was not convinced. "And why do you have 12 blankets hanging in the back room? And why did I see you buying enough protein at the market to feed a small army?" "I'm eating more." "Growing boy, you're 34 years old. Late bloomer." Maggie stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head and walked away, muttering about stubborn men and their secrets. Danny breathed a sigh of relief. That was close. The creatures were getting bigger. Not by much, maybe a few inches in 3 weeks, but he could see the change. Their wings were stronger. Their scales were harder. Pip could now glide short distances, launching herself from the top of a shelf and landing on Danny's head with a proud chirp. She did this constantly. Danny had given up trying to stop her. The strangest part was how much they loved watching him work. Whenever he had a repair job, The creatures would gather around and observe with total fascination. They studied every movement of his hands. They examined every tool he picked up. Sometimes they tried to help, nudging bolts toward him or holding wires in their tiny teeth. They were not very good at helping. But Danny appreciated the effort. One evening, he was working on a particularly difficult engine repair. The ship belonged to a miner named Fred, and it had broken down in the middle of a delivery. Fred needed it fixed by morning or he would lose his contract. Danny had been working for 6 hours straight. His eyes burned. His hands ached. And the problem was deeper than he had thought. Something was wrong with the core alignment, and he could not figure out what. Pip sat on his shoulder, making soft sounds. The others were arranged around the engine, watching. "I don't know what's wrong," Danny admitted, talking to them the way he always talked to machines. "Everything looks right, but it's not working. Something's off, and I can't see it." Pip chirped and jumped down from his shoulder. She walked around the engine, her small head tilting this way and that. Then she stopped at one spot and started scratching at a panel. "What?" Danny leaned closer. "What are you looking at?" He removed the panel. Behind it was a secondary coupling that he had not thought to check. And there it was, a tiny crack that was causing the whole alignment to shift by fractions of a degree. Danny stared at the crack. Then he stared at Pip. "How did you know?" Pip purred and climbed back onto his shoulder. He fixed the coupling. The engine roared to life, running perfectly. Fred got his ship back in time to make his delivery, and he paid Danny extra for the rush job. That night, Danny sat on the floor of the nesting room, surrounded by sleeping creatures. Pip was in her usual spot on his chest. The others were piled around him in a warm heap of scales and tails and tiny wings. "What are you?" Danny whispered. "Where did you come from?" No answer. Just the soft sound of purring and the steady rhythm of 12 small hearts beating. Danny had done some research, though his resources were limited. New Montana did not have access to the main galactic networks. Information came slowly and often in fragments, but he had found something. A mention in an old news article about a species called Draconians, a powerful empire on the other side of the galaxy, and a note buried in the article about how rare and precious their offspring were. Dragon hatchlings? Some people called them. Danny looked at the creatures sleeping around him. Dragons. He was taking care of dragons. "I'm in so much trouble," he said quietly, but he did not stop. He could not stop. These creatures had chosen him for some reason he did not understand. They trusted him. They needed him. And somewhere along the way, Danny realized that he needed them too. His life before the hatchlings had been small and lonely. He had his work. He had his shop. He had acquaintances in the colony who waved when they passed him on the street. But he had no family. No close friends. No one who would notice if he disappeared. Now he had 12 small beings who chirped with joy when he walked in the door, who followed him everywhere like a parade of tiny shadows, who curled up against him at night and made him feel for the first time in years like he mattered. Maybe that was selfish. Maybe he should report them and let the proper authorities take over. Maybe they belonged somewhere else, with their own kind, in a place that could give them everything they needed. But every time Danny thought about giving them up, Pip would nuzzle against his neck and make that soft trilling sound. And he would think about it tomorrow instead. Tomorrow came and went, and came and went again. 3 weeks turned into 4. The hatchlings grew stronger. Danny grew more attached. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, a draconian warship was getting closer. The search had finally found the right trail. They were coming. The negotiations lasted 2 weeks. Representatives from the Draconian Empire filled every available room in the colony. They were too big for human furniture, too formal for human customs, And completely unprepared for human stubbornness, Danny refused to leave. New Montana. The High Matriarch demanded he come to Dracaros. Danny said no. She threatened. She bargained. She explained, in great detail, the honor and privilege being offered to him. She described the palace where he would live, the servants who would attend him, the respect he would receive as guardian of the 12 noble heirs. Danny said no. You are the most frustrating creature I have ever encountered, the High Matriarch told him on the 5th day of negotiations. And I have encountered many creatures. I get that a lot, Danny admitted. The hatchlings watched the proceedings with great interest. They had grown more in the past 2 weeks, their scales hardening, their wings strengthening. Pip could now fly in short bursts, and she used this ability to land on the heads of surprised draconian diplomats. This did not help the negotiations. Maggie had figured everything out by the 2nd day. She had walked into Danny's shop, seen the massive dragons arguing with her neighbor, and simply nodded like this was exactly what she had expected. I knew you were hiding something, she told Danny. I thought it was maybe a gambling problem. This is much weirder. I know. Baby dragons. Yeah, and you're apparently their dad now. It's complicated. Maggie shrugged. Family always is. She became Danny's advisor during the negotiations. She had spent 40 years flying cargo ships across the galaxy. She knew how to deal with difficult species. She knew when to push and when to bend. They're scared, she told Danny one evening. The Draconians, I mean. These hatchlings are everything to them. Their future. Their hope. And they're completely dependent on one human mechanic who refuses to do what they want. I'm not trying to hurt them, Danny said. I just want to stay home. I know. But they don't understand that. In their world, power is everything. Why would anyone choose less power when they can have more? She looked at Pip, who's asleep in her usual spot on Danny's chest. You need to help them understand. The breakthrough came on the 9th day. Danny asked for a private meeting with the High Matriarch. Just the two of them, no advisors or warriors. She agreed, though she seemed suspicious. They sat in Danny's shop, surrounded by the clutter and chaos that had become home to 12 dragonaires. The High Matriarch looked wildly out of place, her crimson scales and golden crown surrounded by engine parts and oil cans. Why? She asked. Help me understand why you would refuse everything we offer. Danny thought about the question for a long time. When I was young, he said finally, I had nothing. No family. No home. I moved from place to place, working whatever jobs I could find, never staying long enough to matter to anyone. He gestured at the shop around them. Then I came here. I built this place with my own hands. I made friends. I became part of something. For the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere. He met the High Matriarch's eyes. Your offer is generous. But if I leave, I lose everything that makes me who I am. I become a guest in your world, dependent on your kindness. The hatchlings wouldn't be getting Danny Kowalski, the mechanic who found them in his shop and loved them like his own. They'd be getting some lost human pretending to be something he's not. The High Matriarch was quiet for a long moment. And you believe this would harm them? I believe it would harm all of us. She studied him with those ancient, glowing eyes. Danny had learned that the High Matriarch was over 300 years old. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had survived wars and plagues and the slow decline of her own species. But she had never met anyone quite like Danny Kowalski. There might be another way, she said slowly. A compromise. The final agreement satisfied almost no one, which Maggie said was the sign of a good deal. Danny would remain on New Montana. The hatchlings would stay with him until they reached maturity, which would take about 15 years. At that point, they could choose their own paths. Some might return to Dracaros, Some might stay with Danny. Some might go somewhere else entirely. Draconian tutors would visit the colony regularly to teach the hatchlings about their heritage. Draconian guardians would rotate through to provide protection and support. And an embassy would be established in the old grain silo at the edge of town. In exchange, Danny agreed to visit Dracaros 4 times a year. He would learn their customs, meet their people, and let the hatchlings experience their ancestral home. He also accepted a stipend that was by human standards. Enough money to buy a small planet. Danny donated most of it to the colony's school system. The first time a Draconian tutor arrived, it caused quite a commotion. A dragon walking down the main street of New Montana was not something anyone had expected to see. But people adapted quickly. Within a few months, it was normal to see massive-scale beings buying supplies at the market or discussing farming techniques with local growers. The hatchlings thrived. They learned to fly properly, soaring above the colony in formation, while Danny watched from below with a mix of pride and terror. They learned to speak, first in Draconian and then in Human Standard, their voices growing stronger each month. They learned their histories, their bloodlines, the weight of the legacy they carried. But they also learned how to fix engines, how to plant crops, how to cook human food and tell human jokes and live a small, simple life in a small, simple place. Pip never stopped sleeping on Danny's chest, even after she grew large enough that he had to lie very still to support her weight. The High Matriarch visited one last time before returning to Dracaros. She found Danny in his shop, welding an exhaust manifold, while 3 hatchlings watched with fascination. Pip dozed on a nearby shelf, one eye half open. "You could have had everything," she said. "Power, glory, the gratitude of an empire." Danny shrugged without looking up from his work. "I've got a good shop, good neighbors, 12 kids who think watching me fix engines is the most exciting thing in the universe." He finally met her eyes and smiled. "What else would I need?" The High Matriarch stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly, that same wondering expression on her face that Danny had first seen weeks ago. "We have studied humans for centuries," she said. "We thought we understood you. Your wars, your greed, your endless chaos." She paused at the door of the shop, looking back at the small human surrounded by dragon children. "We understood nothing." After she left, Pip flew down from her shelf and landed on Danny's shoulder. She nuzzled against his neck and made that soft, trilling sound he loved. Yeah, Danny muttered, reaching up to scratch under her chin. "I love you too, you weird little lizard." Across the galaxy, the great Draconian Empire would tell this story for generations. The tale of the hatchlings who crossed the stars and found their guardian in the most unlikely of places. The human mechanic who refused power and wealth because he already had everything that mattered. Scholars would study it. Poets would sing about it. Children would hear it before sleep and dream of distant colonies and impossible friendships. But in Danny's shop, there was only the hum of machinery, the warmth of sleeping dragons, and a man who had never wanted to be extraordinary. Sometimes the universe makes those choices for you, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, it gives you exactly what you need. Danny finished his welding, turned off his torch, and looked around at his strange, wonderful family. "Time for dinner," he said. "Who's hungry?" 12 voices answered at once, a chorus of chirps and roars and happy sounds that filled the shop with life. Danny smiled and led them home. The sky over New Montana turned dark in the middle of the day. Danny was outside his shop, checking a coolant leak on a farming vehicle, when the shadow fell. He looked up and felt his heart stop. A ship was descending through the clouds. Not a normal ship. This one was massive, larger than the entire colony, with sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to absorb the light. Warning sirens started screaming across the spaceport. People ran for cover. Someone was shouting through the emergency broadcast system, telling everyone to stay indoors and remain calm. Danny did not stay calm. He ran back into his shop, where 12 hatchlings were napping in their usual pile. "Wake up," he said, his voice shaking. "Come on, all of you, wake up." Pip lifted her head and chirped a question. The others stirred, blinking sleepy eyes. "I think someone's here for you," Danny said. He did not know what to do. Hide them? Run? There was nowhere to go. The ship outside was so big, it could probably track a mouse running across the colony. The ground shook as the warship landed. Danny could hear the hiss of pressure systems and the thud of heavy feet. Many heavy feet, moving toward his shop. He picked up a wrench. It was a stupid thing to do, he knew. Whatever was coming, a wrench was not going to stop it. But he could not just stand there empty-handed. The hatchlings had gathered around his feet. They were making sounds he had never heard before, low rumbling noises that vibrated in his chest. Pip climbed up to her spot on his shoulder and pressed. Against his neck, the shop door exploded inward. 4 figures stood in the opening. They were huge, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in scales that gleamed like polished metal. They wore armor that looked ancient and powerful, decorated with symbols Danny did not recognize. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire. Dragons. Full-grown. Dragons. Danny had never seen anything so terrifying in his life. Behind the warriors, another figure appeared. This one was different. She was slightly smaller, though still massive by human standards. Her scales were deep crimson, and she wore a golden crown that wrapped around her horns. She moved with the cold grace of absolute authority. "Human," she said. Her voice was like grinding stone, deep and heavy and impossible to ignore. "You have something that belongs to us." Danny's grip tightened on his wrench. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "I didn't steal them," he managed to say. "They showed up on their own. They were in my shop one night, and I took care of them." Silence. The Crimson Dragon stepped forward. Her eyes swept across the shop, taking in the nesting room, the food bowls, the blankets arranged in careful piles. Then her gaze landed on the hatchlings clustered around Danny's feet. "Do you know what these are?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what you have been keeping in this filthy little building?" "Dragons," Danny said. "Baby dragons. They are not simply dragons. They are the heirs to the 12 noble houses of the Draconian Empire. Their bloodlines stretch back 10,000 years. Their absence has brought our civilization to the edge of civil war. And you," she pointed one clawed finger at him, "you have been keeping them in a mechanic's shop." "It's a good shop," Danny said weakly. One of the warriors moved toward him, reaching for the hatchlings. And that was when everything changed. Pip screamed. It was not the soft chirp Danny was used to. This was a sound of pure fury, high-pitched and piercing. She puffed out her scales, making herself look twice her actual size, and placed herself between Danny and the warrior. The other hatchlings joined in. They formed a protective circle around Danny's legs, all 12 of them making that terrible warning sound. Their tiny wings spread wide, their small teeth bared. They looked ready to fight creatures 10 times their size. The warrior hesitated, looking back at the Crimson Dragon. "High Matriarch?" The High Matriarch had gone very still. Her glowing eyes were fixed on Pip, who was still screaming defiance from Danny's shoulder. "Impossible," she whispered. "What?" Danny asked. "What's impossible?" She did not answer. Instead, she walked slowly forward, her heavy footsteps making the floor shake. She stopped just a few feet away and knelt down, bringing her massive head level with Danny's. Up close, she was even more terrifying. Her scales were covered in fine scars. Her teeth were longer than Danny's fingers. Her breath was hot against his face, but her expression had changed. The cold authority was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like wonder. "They have imprinted on you," she said. "Do you understand what that means, human?" Danny shook his head. When draconian hatchlings are born, they seek warmth and safety. Their instincts are millions of years old. They can sense the difference between a temporary shelter and a true guardian. They know, in ways even we do not fully understand, who will protect them. She paused, her eyes searching Danny's face. These 12 hatchlings crossed the galaxy. They passed through a trading post filled with 1,000 different species. They could have imprinted on anyone. But they waited. They searched. And they found you. "I just took care of them," Danny said. "I fed them and kept them warm." Anyone would have done the same. No, anyone would not. The High Matriarch stood up. "I have seen how other species treat our young when they find them. They cage them. They sell them. They try to use them for power or profit. You did none of these things. You gave them names. You let them sleep on your chest. You loved them." The word hung in the air between them. "By the ancient laws of our empire," she continued, "a bonded guardian is sacred. To harm you would be to harm the hatchlings themselves. Your life is connected to theirs now. Your well-being is their well-being." General Thornax, the largest of the warriors, made a frustrated sound. "Then we take them by force. We separate them from this human and break the bond." "There is no breaking this bond," the High Matriarch said sharply. "Have you forgotten everything you learned as a child? The imprinting is permanent. If we take them from him against their will, they will sick him. They will refuse to eat. They will die." Silence filled the shop. Danny looked down at the hatchlings still clustered around his feet. They were watching the adults with those intelligent eyes, following every word, even if they could not understand the language yet. Pip pressed closer against his neck, her small body trembling. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you," Danny whispered to her. "I promise." The High Matriarch heard him. Her expression shifted again, something softer entering those ancient eyes. "You are their father now," she said. "By draconian law, by bonds older than written history. You will come with us to Dracaros. You will be given estates and servants and wealth beyond human imagination. You will raise these hatchlings as your own children, with all the resources of the Empire at your disposal." She made it sound like an offer, but Danny understood it was also a command. "What if I don't want to leave?" he asked quietly. The High Matriarch tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she could not quite solve. "Why would you want to stay here? This place is nothing, a speck of dust on the edge of nowhere. You would give up the chance to live like a king for this?" Danny looked around his shop. The cluttered shelves, the oil-stained floor, the broken machines waiting to be fixed. "This is my home," he said. "These are my people. I can't just leave them." Pip chirped softly, as if she understood. The other hatchlings pressed closer against his legs. The High Matriarch stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something Danny never expected. She laughed. It was not a cruel laugh or a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just seen something impossible happen right in front of them. "Humans," she said, shaking her massive head, "we have studied your species for centuries. We thought we knew everything about you. Your wars, your greed, your endless capacity for destruction." She looked at Danny, at the 12 hatchlings wrapped around him, at the small warm life he had built in this forgotten corner of the galaxy. "We understood nothing.